Okay, sorry. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to come and learn about your word and learn about how to witness in a powerful way with the help of your Holy Spirit. And thank you so much for Jeffrey's ministry and Melly and her husband and all the other people that assist Jeffrey and his work. And so I pray the Holy Spirit will continue to ignite him and the words he shares, and that he will enlighten us in how we can pass his wisdom, which is your wisdom, God, on to other people, and be a good witness. And we are in the end times, Lord, and we know how much you want everyone to at least have heard about Jesus and make a decision whether they'll accept him or reject him. So we have a great opportunity right now, and we thank you for Jeffrey giving us more tools to share your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Richard.
And while Jeff's walking up to the podium, who needs some?
Anyone else need the outline? We started this the outline last week on it's titled The God Who Is, and we worked our way through the first 4 pages or so, and we'll be picking up this evening on page 5 with Anthony Flu's Flight to God, and then continuing on. So good to see you all, and very much looking forward to our presentation this evening. I'll be doing the first part, and Donna will be following up with another section of the notes, and very much looking forward to that. I know she's well prepared. She always takes that very, very seriously and does an excellent job. So if you're following along in the outlines, if you want to go back to page 1, we talked about a preface to this portion of our course, Who Needs Philosophy? And any lover of truth, which is essentially what the word means, philosophy, it's a lover of truth. Anyone who truly wants to live a serious life, honoring God wholeheartedly, would of course be interested in the study of philosophy, which is really just kind of an organized way of thinking so that we can maximize our witness to others. Stumbling block or stepping stone, as you see there on page 1. Many Christians, we talked about, are skeptical of philosophy because, frankly, like everything else, philosophy has been so utterly perverted through human history. Now, that doesn't mean that it's an illegitimate field, not at all. In fact, it's absolutely essential, and we should love it and take it seriously. But like every other human endeavor, philosophy has been so corrupted. As I wrote there from the outset, philosophy has been an intellectual and moral morass due to the noetic effects of sin on the human soul. And many Christians have come to the belief that philosophy is to be avoided. There are a couple of cautionary verses in Scripture, but what the Apostle Paul is talking about in those cautionary verses is the way philosophy has been, again, perverted and corrupted by those who are not true seekers after truth. On page 2, at the top of the page, classical philosophy developed outside of biblical revelation. It started in classical Greece, which, as far as we know, was hardly, if any, influenced by the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition. So classical philosophy developed outside of biblical revelation. Therefore, of course, it depended exclusively on what we would call general revelation or natural theology. And that's the truths about the world and, frankly, about human nature that we can deduce just through careful observation. And then, of course, applying human reasoning. And human reasoning, as you know, is less than totally reliable because, again, of our sin nature. In fact, we need additional insight and wisdom via special revelation, which God in his love for us has granted us in his word, the Bible. The Bible's not anti-philosophical. In fact, it's the greatest work on philosophy ever written, but the Bible is not a book on systematic philosophy any more than it's a book on systematic theology. But philosophy and theology are embedded all through Scripture. And the Bible does put forth a coherent philosophy of life, which means it's understandable, a consistent philosophy of life, which is quite remarkable when you consider that the Bible, as we know it, was written over a period of about 1,500 years from Moses through the first century, and yet by more than 40 authors, by the way, and yet the Bible sets forth a very consistent philosophy of life and a comprehensive philosophy of life that covers everything that truly ultimately matters. For instance, origins. Where did we and where did everything else come from anyway? The Bible addresses that. Identity. Who am I or what am I? The Bible's very clear about that. Our purpose and meaning in life. What are we supposed to be doing here? And our destiny, where are we going after death? So the Bible, again, very coherent, very consistent, and very comprehensive in addressing those basic philosophical issues. Logic and reason are gifts of God. God insists that we use our mental faculties to serve him. We're called to serve him wholeheartedly with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And who needs philosophy? Well, anyone who's serious about pursuing truth in life. And the quote from C.S. Lewis, you may be very familiar with that. Good philosophy, he wrote, must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. And the world's full of bad philosophy. Now, most people, everybody has a general orientation of what constitutes reality. But very, very few people have thought about this in any kind of systematic, organized sense. But nonetheless, everybody has a philosophy of life, for better, for worse. And so Lewis is saying, everybody, has a basic understanding of reality as they perceive it. But a lot of it's erroneous. And that's why we need, to follow the admonitions of Scripture very, very faithfully. Yes, Richard?
So almost every day I read about or see something that there's something like, for example, on this question of destiny, where I'm going after death, that one of the organizations I follow is Compass, and there was a question on Compass that was reported in this email today about, someone said, they thought that when they died, their body went to the grave, didn't go any place out in their spirit and everything else. And he was saying exactly the same thing. There's so much false information out there, so much confusion about, where do I go when I die?
Yeah.
Is my soul or spirit? What's a soul and a spirit? And unless we get into the Bible, we can't answer those questions.
That's right. Yeah. Do we continue to exist as a sentient being? In other words, a self-aware being, or not? That's the issue. And different religions and philosophies and all have different answers to that. Certainly, Scripture does. Yeah. So the section there, introduction, the new atheism, we talked about going back to the early 2000s, how there were several high-profile, very aggressive atheists that came to the forefront, writing new books, trying to destroy any foundation for Christian faith at all. And they all, frankly, failed miserably, but nonetheless, they generated an enormous amount of attention. You see at the bottom of page 2 there, the quote from Dinesh D'Souza: "The atheists no longer just want us to tolerate them. They want to monopolize the public square and to expel Christians from it." And when you think about their orientation, it sounds very similar to the Marxist left. And that is, they used to preach, tolerance and openness and this sort of thing until they get in positions of power. And then we realize they're the most intolerant people imaginable. And the same thing holds true for a lot of these militant atheists. On the next page, page 3, we spent quite a bit of time talking about Richard Dawkins, probably the highest profile of these so-called new atheists. And it's Dawkins who informs us that religious faith of any kind is a kind of mental illness. Okay. And furthermore, religious education is merely a form of child abuse. You might conclude from that he's not a real fan of religion, Christianity in particular. And then this section from his most famous book, The God Delusion, where he, you see it there in your notes, Dawkins on the character of God, one of the most famous, I guess, comments that he ever wrote. Just absolutely, so disrespectful and all. I mean, it's hard to imagine that anybody would be that antagonistic toward God. But because
only male and female.
Well, that's right. See, even Richard Dawkins, everybody is to some extent or another connected with reality. Some very little. And but at least with Richard Dawkins, yeah, he's come out very forcefully in the last several months against the transgender fad, and he will not tolerate that at all. So see, nobody's perfect, which means that nobody is perfectly wrong all the time. Okay, I mean, even Hitler loved his dog and treated it very well, by the way. So nobody's wrong all the time, and evil all the time. Sam Harris is another one who we talked about briefly. Religion, he says, is a harmful delusion, a menace to civilization, and the source of most of the world's problems. Well, let's just look at the 20th century as an example and all the horrific injustice and murder and mayhem that was taking place in the 20th century. And overwhelmingly, it was by hardcore anti-God atheists. Think of Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer in all of human history. Second would probably be Joseph Stalin, and he's credited with murdering 40 million or more Russians during his political career. And then we have Hitler, of course, who also added millions more and all. Idi Amin, I don't know, who basically wiped out, well, let's take Pol Pot first of all, of Cambodia, who wiped out 1/3 of the entire population of Cambodia. 1/3. I don't think anybody has ever committed mass murder per capita on that level as Pol Pot did. And then Idi Amin, in a country of about 7 million, he murders about 300,000 in Uganda. And so all these people are anti-God, obviously. So the comment there that Sam Harris makes is just so fallacious and has no factual historical validity at all. On page 4, we skipped over Daniel Dennett, Michael Onfray, Victor Stenger, just for time's sake. We talked briefly about Christopher Hitchens, who, as I describe him, as kind of a Bertrand Russell wannabe. And Bertrand Russell, probably one of the highest profile religious skeptics of the first half of the 20th century. And then we looked at atheistic totalitarianism. Many atheist advocates are left-wing fascists who believe the state should control not only the science education, but the religious upbringing of young people. Again, Richard Dawkins says, how much do we regard children as being the property of their parents? You know, the implication here is that parents cannot be trusted to raise children. The state needs to take, control over that. And we hear that all the time today among left-wing educators in America. They even want to introduce hardcore pornography into elementary schools and middle schools and so on. And they don't believe that parents have any right whatsoever to challenge what's being taught in the schools. So it's just an absolutely abject evil situation that's being promoted regularly in our public schools and many private schools, by the way, as well. At the bottom of page 4, Nicholas Humphrey writes, parents have no God-given license to educate their children in whatever ways they personally choose. Well, if parents don't, then who does have, God-given license? Well, apparently the state. And sounds like something right out of Animal Farm or Brave New World or 1984, doesn't it? And then we closed last week with some comments on page 5 there. Richard Rorty, celebrity professor over the last 40 or 50 years, who says that university professors should arrange things so that students who enter the university as bigoted, homophobic, religious fundamentalists will leave college with views more like ours, like our own. Parents who are religious traditionalists need to realize and accept that part of the role of a professor is to undermine their values. Now, when I was teaching, I didn't realize that was my job, was to destroy everything that students had come in believing from their home environment. And he goes on to say, we're going to go right on trying to discredit you, talking about parents. We're going to try to discredit you in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamentalist religious community of any dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable. I tell you, that's a quote that we need to be sure we save and preserve because it's so often so relevant in terms of the culture war that's raging in America today. That really puts it, I think, quite effectively. And then we ended with the quote from Dinesh D'Souza in his book, What's So Great About Christianity, in which he wrote, isn't it brilliant that left-wing professors have persuaded Christian moms and dads to finance the destruction of their own beliefs and values? I tell you, we need a different mindset when it comes to the education of our children and what are they going to be exposed to when we send them off to college. So any comments or questions about any of that before we move on with some new material for this evening? Anything? All right, well, let's do just that. And if you're following along in your notes, next is that section, Anthony Flu's Flight to God. And in his autobiography called There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind, Anthony Flew, a very notable philosopher, 20th century philosopher, offered a parable to illustrate the power of presuppositions and unexamined worldviews. And this is what he says, quote, now let us begin with a parable. Now imagine that a satellite phone is washed ashore on a remote island inhabited by a tribe that's never had contact with modern civilization. So imagine this, cell phone just happens to float up on the beach. The natives play with the numbers on the dial pad and they hear different voices upon hitting certain sequences. They assume first that it's the device that makes these noises. Some of the cleverer natives, the scientists, quote, scientists of the tribe, assemble an exact replica. They must be pretty ingenious scientists. And they hit the numbers again. They hear the voices again. The conclusion seems very obvious to them. This particular combination of crystals and metals and chemicals produces what seems like human voices, and this means that the voices are simply properties of the device. It's the device speaking to them, say, the way it's composed. But the tribal sage, there's among the tribe, there's somebody who is a bit of a thinker, okay? He summons the scientists for a discussion. He has thought long and hard about this matter, and he's reached the conclusion that the voices coming through the instrument must be coming from people like themselves, people who are living and conscious, although speaking in certainly a different language. Instead of assuming that the voices are simply properties of the machine itself, the handset, they should investigate the possibility that through some mysterious communication network, they are somehow, quote, in touch with other human beings who live somewhere. Perhaps further study along these lines could lead to a greater understanding of the world beyond their island. But the, quote, scientists just laugh at him. And they say, look, when we damage the instrument, the voices stop coming. So they're obviously nothing more than sounds produced by a unique combination of lithium and printed circuit boards and light emitting diodes. Okay. So what's the point of that? Well, Flew draws a connection between the island, quote, scientists and their atheist and agnostic counterparts in Western civilization. When the sage points out that the phone might suggest some greater reality beyond the limitations of their current level of understanding and the parameters of their own little world, they adamantly reject his insight. See, for them, their world is the only world that exists. Rather than allowing the evidence to shape their theories, they resolutely cling to their theories, to their dogmas. In their minds, in the minds of these native scientists, there is nothing above and beyond the little world of their own sense perception and personal experience. Bound by their anti-transcendent bias, they have no sense of transcendence. They don't even know there's other human beings on Earth or anything. They think their little island is all that exists. Bound by their anti-transcendent biases, they assume that the answer to the mystery of the phone is contained within the phone itself, within the materiality of the object itself. See, in their ignorance, they exhibit an appalling lack of curiosity when it comes to where this thing came from that happened to float up to the beach, who made it, or why it works. See, their whole parameter for thinking is so contained in their little society itself. They can't imagine there's anything outside their little society and their little island. So Anthony Flew summarizes the mindset of naturalistic scientists this way. He says, we should not ask for an explanation of how it is. This is how naturalistic scientists think, say. We should not ask for an explanation of how it is that the world exists. The world is here, and that's all there is to it. Since we cannot accept the transcendent source of life, then we choose to believe the impossible, and that is that life arose spontaneously by chance from matter, or the laws of physics are lawless laws that arise from the void. So in other words, atheists, regardless of whether they hold PhD degrees or not, they think on the same level as the so-called scientists on that little island. Now, for Anthony Flew, see, he's an Oxford University professor of philosophy. And he was the 20th century's most original and influential atheist intellectual. Prior to Anthony Flew, the major arguments that people continued to put forth for atheism came from way back 200, 250 years earlier during the Enlightenment, you know, so-called thinkers like David Hume, for instance, or else by 19th century German philosophers like Feuerbach and Friedrich Nietzsche and people like that. In the early 20th century, Bertrand Russell produced a few polemical pamphlets, such as Why I Am Not a Christian, but he generated no original arguments and produced no major work on systematic atheism. Likewise, atheists such as ones who come around and become prominent after World War II, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Richard Rorty, Jacques Derrida, people like that, they also generated no new arguments and mainly focused on the problem of evil instead. Their whole argument is if there was a God, then the world would be like we want it to be. There would be no evil and suffering and hardship and so on. But life is hard, so obviously there's no God. Okay. Well, that's easily refutable, but that's the mentality of these people. So without going into details, as I said, Anthony Flew, who was acknowledged back then in the last half of the 20th century as probably the most original atheist philosopher thinker, he set forth what many believed were the strongest arguments for atheism by any modern philosopher. However, Anthony Flew announces in 2004 that he now rejects atheism and that he's converted to theism, to belief in God, an eternal, creator God. In his subsequent book, There Is a God, Anthony Flew explains that the scientific evidence and the philosophical arguments for the existence of God are absolutely too compelling to ignore. And this is what he writes, quote, I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that this universe's intricate laws manifest what scientists have called the mind of God. I believe that life and reproduction originate in a divine source. This is the world picture as I see it that has emerged from modern science. But it is not science alone that has guided me. I've also been helped by a renewed study of the classical philosophical arguments for the existence of God, going all the way back to Thomas Aquinas and actually far beyond that. In fact, remember we talked a few sessions ago about Plato in Republic, his book Republic, and he puts forth, what many would consider pretty compelling arguments for the existence of God. So Anthony Flew goes on to write, when I finally came to recognize the existence of God, it was really not a paradigm shift on my part, because my paradigm remains just as Plato had written in Republic, quote, we must follow the argument wherever it leads. So that's what all honest people do. They follow the argument wherever it leads. Wherever the facts and the reason lead, then we follow it. That's the only way to be intellectually honest about things. And by the way, Scripture helps clarify that all along the way. Scripture's not counter to this approach that he's putting forth here. So in his book, Anthony Flew implored his former colleagues and atheist soulmates to re-examine the evidence for God with an open mind. And in particular, he cites three questions that scientific naturalism cannot possibly answer. One is, how did the laws of nature come to be? That is absolutely unfathomable, that the laws of nature came from immaterial sources. Secondly, how did life originate from non-life? back in 1953, scientists believed that they were making some progress explaining how life just spontaneously generated millions and millions of years ago. They never could come up with a conclusive answer. And by the way, they haven't since. And that's been like 70 years ago, 75 years ago. They still are as clueless today as they were back in the 1950s, how life could have just spontaneously originated. And then thirdly, how did the universe, including all of space and time and matter, how did all that come into existence? And Flew says, look, there's no explanation except that there's an intelligent mind, an intelligent designer that is the source of all that exists. Naturalism is an absolute failure in terms of providing any kind of answer. Richard, were
Yeah,
you
I
going
was
to
wondering-
comment? Yeah.
Well, Flew being presumably intellectual, he's giving all these sources, but the main source about God is in the Bible. He doesn't say anything about using the Bible, going to the Bible to
Right.
get the answers.
See, what we would say is he is absolutely right, everything he's concluded. And by the way, we've known that for at least 3,500 years, going back to Moses
Yeah.
and the author of Genesis and so on. So the Bible confirms what he has arrived at, just like Plato arrived at it, without any knowledge of Moses's writings, as far as we know. Likewise, Anthony Flew has just come to this conclusion by following the evidence, the arguments, wherever they lead.
And so to me, it seems like he's not even acknowledging that the Bible is God's word.
No, not at this point.
Yeah.
Not at this point. Now, he does become a theist the last several years of his life. Whether he actually converted to Christianity, I'm not sure that anybody really knows. But certainly he had become a believer in God.
Hey, God.
Yeah. Now, the response by many of Anthony Flew's former allies was really interesting. These are supposed to be great philosophers, great scientists, great thinkers, right? Okay. A Christian, Roy Abraham Varghese, puts it this way. He says, the atheist advocates of tolerance were not themselves very tolerant when it came to Flew's conversion to theism. And apparently religious zealots don't have a monopoly on dogmatism or incivility or fanaticism or paranoia, because his former friends and all certainly expressed all those reactions. Very typical was the caustic reaction of our good friend Richard Dawkins, the Oxford evolutionary biologist. And how did he explain Flew's conversion to theism? He said basically that Flew was an apostate. He was a traitor to the atheist brotherhood. Not that there is one, but anyway. Dawkins suggested that Flew's conversion was a result of, well, what would you think? Dementia. Yes. Old age, senility, and perhaps a failure of courage in the face of his impending death. So according to Richard Dawkins, well, Flew started acknowledging that there's a God because he realized time was running out and he didn't have the courage to face death. Honestly. See, that's exactly what Nietzsche and people like that would have said 100 years earlier. That courageous people realize there's not a God, and that's okay. It's only cowards and weak people who want to believe in God. Remember, we kind of touched on that last time. And furthermore, Dawkins contrasted Flew with the heroic atheist icon of the 20th century, Bertrand Russell, who remained defiantly anti-God to the end. So he's saying, you know, we need to be courageous like Bertrand Russell was. Now, like many militant atheists, Richard Dawkins is an advocate of what he calls free thought. But apparently, free thought only when it leads a person away from belief in God. Okay. If it leads a person to God, then the person is becoming very weak, okay, and can't face the realities of life. Comments, questions, anything?
How does Dawkins sleep at night?
Well, he rests secure in the fact that he never transgendered. Okay, so I guess that's how he. So at least he's living an authentic life to that extent. Okay, yes, Agape.
Any books that you recommend about faith and science that have evidences that God is a creator, books that we can read and.
Oh, yeah, many. Let's see.
An evidence from the Bible itself.
Yeah, I don't have them in these notes, but yeah, there's many that I can recommend. Bruce could recommend many as well. And
There's a good one, the Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer. It doesn't have Christianity in it, but it's, Bruce, I know you read it, right? Long time ago. I'm just about a third of the way through it, but it's awesome. And it talks about intelligent design and goes into helpful details. It's amazing.
yeah.
What I did, you know.
In fact, I believe on our Areopagus website, we have quite a list of books that address just that topic. Yeah, but I can look that up and get back with you. I don't have it right here in front of me. All right, so let's take a look real quickly here at the faith factor section there in your notes. Let's start with the fact that faith should not be an impediment to our search for truth and reality. Now, in fact, unlike naturalists, atheists, materialists, and so on, we understand that we can access reality through our observations of nature, including our observations of human nature. We understand that, yeah, we can derive a lot of insight through just natural revelation, general revelation. But also, God in his grace and love for us has very explicitly conveyed greater truths through special revelation as well. So yeah, we're not science deniers, at least true science. There's a lot of bogus science, of course, but when it comes to science, yeah, that's a great blessing and we appreciate it. But we also understand that there's a reality above and beyond just, the world of science and the natural world and so on. Naturalistic materialists, though, are limited in that they are trapped exclusively in a purely physical realm, and they reject anything supernatural. Obviously, people sometimes don't really believe what they claim to believe, and assertions aside, though, we demonstrate what we really believe by what we think and how we live our lives. What we think and do, more than what we say, exemplify our true perceptions of reality. This is certainly the case when it comes to faith or lack of faith in the reality of God. It's shown through how we live our lives. What we truly believe about God defines not only our convictions and what we profess to believe, but also our entire worldview, including our concept of fundamental realities such as who are we, what are we, how did we get here, what are we supposed to be doing here, and our ultimate destiny. In addition to our general worldview, our beliefs about God strongly influence our views on social, cultural, they should influence our political views and our views on economics and the full range of life issues. It's what Francis Schaeffer referred to as the lordship of Jesus Christ over the whole of life. In other words, to be a true disciple of Christ doesn't just mean that you're this, pious person who maintains a prayer life as we should, church involvement as we should, loves their family as we should. But when it comes to the larger issues of life, your Christian faith really doesn't relate that much to that. See, that's just politics, and politics is dirty and whatever. And true pious Christians wouldn't want anything to do with that sort of thing. So that's a mentality that Schaeffer referred to constantly in his writings as pietism. And that's very explicitly anti-biblical. So you see there the mind-soul connection. And let me just say about that as in every area of theology and in every area of Christian apologetics, when it comes to the search for evidence for the existence of God, a clean heart facilitates a clear mind. And the Bible affirms that true faith illuminates our understanding. In Psalm 111, verse 10, we read, "The fear of the Lord," in other words, the reverential respect for the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom. All who follow his precepts have good understanding. So if we set our heart and mind to following God wholeheartedly, it will illuminate our thinking and we can think more clearly. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight," including, I would say, your paths of thought, how we think as well. Psalm 14:1, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, their deeds are vile, and there is no one who does good." Now, by the way, when the Hebrew word for fool in that passage, the Hebrew word is nabal, and nabal means somebody who's intentionally, purposefully ignorant. In other words, willfully stupid, frankly. So the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. This is somebody who has no interest whatsoever, no respect for truth. Okay. And so a verse like that very clearly links atheism, for instance, with immorality. According to the Apostle Paul in Romans 1, those who reject God's revelation in nature inevitably degenerate into depravity, intellectual depravity, and oftentimes moral depravity as well. And then to quote Blaise Pascal, I think Donna's going to be speaking about Pascal, "God has revealed evidence of himself that's sufficiently clear to those with open hearts and minds, but which is sufficiently vague so as not to force those whose hearts and minds are closed to belief in him." And I think Pascal is, quite wise in that respect. So any comments you might have before we move on?
The last quote by Blaise Pascal, I think that's in the book Bibliology, isn't it? This is a great book.
Yes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. In fact, it may be in most of my books. Blaise Pascal, great thinker of the 17th century. Yeah. Anything? Yes, Agape?
Even for people who have a very simple faith and who are not scientists, Jesus told the Thomas, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed."
Mm-hmm.
So this is just the faith itself. It can help us to believe too.
Mm-hmm. And there are people that are seemingly kind of, very simple people, but they have great wisdom.
Yes.
And when you think about it, the whole purpose of education, of acquiring knowledge, is obviously not to try and impress other people with how smart you are. It's to acquire wisdom. And a certain amount of knowledge is essential for wisdom. Usually there's a pretty direct correlation, but yeah, that's the purpose in life, is to be wise.
This is why Jesus chose Peter as a fisherman, and at the same time, he chose Paul, and Paul was very, educated, and he was grew up learning all the Roman philosophy. So two different people, two different examples. One is simple, coming from a very simple background, have no education, and but he had a great faith. And Paul, he didn't believe in the beginning, but then he came to Jesus.
Yes, yeah, good example. Yeah, the difference in Peter and Paul. Yeah. Very good. Anything else? Well, I'm gonna turn things over here to Donna for the rest of our session, and very much looking forward to it. I know Donna's, as she always does, prepared very very well, and very much looking forward to your observations and all.
You're also putting Donna on the spot now.
Well, she had advance warning.
I do a little warning.
So, Donna, looking forward to your presentation. Come on up. That's kind of hard to scoot up or whatever.
Yes, yeah. So I was going to say, well, hello, everybody, and on Zoom, hello. I wanted to start out saying, one of the benefits of having a husband who does IT is that, he's like, no, that's not me, is that, he put together a video that I would like to start the presentation with.
Your reputations
Yes.
sitting out there, Paul.
Yeah.
Careful.
I told him he's gonna be really, really sought after.
We didn't agree that she would say who did me this.
The
Alright.
good thing is you didn't say he was a nerd.
He's a level.
Pretty close.
You're getting-
What was that first did somehow?
I don't know, I think I met him first.
Well,
After me, right, yeah.
let's see. Cross your fingers,
Yeah.
everybody.
Everybody pray. Oh, I'm blocking now, I need to move over.
Stand by. I gotta share it with the other crowd. All right.
So. Disturbing, to say the least. But this is where I'd like to start.
Good job.
Ah, well, yes, good job, Paul.
Thank you.
So obviously, these images are quite disturbing. But also the song and the images seem at first glance to contradict each other. We have the peaceful tones and music contrasting with these disturbing images, and they seem incongruent. But are they? Or are they really? In the appendix, you can see the lyrics for the song, not that we need them, we all probably know them already. But you can see in the lyrics on the first page, and upon analysis, these images that we just saw are actually the result of people living out these words. In it, we go, no heaven and no hell, above us only sky, and living for today. Well, if there is no heaven, and if there is no hell, then the only thing above us is empty sky. And then, yes, we're gonna live for today, and today only, for yourself, the old adage, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. We take all now any way you can, because that's it, that's all that matters, that's all you're living for. He goes on to say, imagine there's no country. Well, my goodness, look at our southern border. If we want to see what no country looks like, let's look at that. We've got terrible, monstrous people crossing the border, dragging these poor innocent children with them. There's no regulation, there's no care, as our border, we have no border, and that's what it looks like. No country doesn't look like peace. Everybody's sharing equally. It's invasion and it's power. We go on to say nothing to kill or die for. And I would go on to say, there's nothing to kill or die for. I would say there's probably not much to live for. But one of the things that really struck me as I was thinking about that, actually just this morning, nothing to kill or nothing to die for. Christ died for us. While we were still yet sinners, Christ died for us. And we are to emulate him. There are things worth dying for in this world, for God, for our families, for our children, for our country. There are things bigger than us and outside of us. So there are absolutely things worth dying for. But yet, if we're only focused on ourselves, there isn't. That's it. We're not. You'll kill somebody, but you're not willing to die for somebody. So there's nothing to sacrifice for. It goes on, of course, to say no religion too, which is what this whole thing is about. But then he goes on to fantastically say, imagine all the people living life in peace. Well, he says, I may be a dreamer. Guess what? You're delusional. No religion, no possessions, no need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. It's a complete delusion that man would live in peace and harmony and prosperity if there was no heaven or hell or God or something to die for. So if there's nothing to die for, there's nothing to sacrifice for, then it's, this is what it is. This is it. And so it's bleak, it's dark. And that is where we're going. We are surrounded by a world that more and more believes less and less in God. So we are confronted with this human predicament, this absurdity of life without God. Many, if not most of those in our current government, education, major institutions, they all believe in this utopian fantasy fueled by a willful blindness that if only we had better, bigger, broader institutions, there would be equity for all. Again, delusions of a blissful existence, if only money weren't a thing. And possessions, if any, would be divided equally and evenly by them, by the way. So again, these things are fueled by that willful blindness that Jeffrey mentioned earlier. But that's really all it is, a terrible, destructive delusion. If above us is only sky, then this is it. There's nothing more. Dog eat dog, my way or no way, kill or be killed. And that is the reality of life without God. And a life without God is by definition hell, which I think these images portrayed, hell on earth. So why are we talking about this tonight? Well, again, this is the human predicament of life without God. And it's part of a branch of apologetics that's relatively new. And it's the idea that since we live in this post-theistic universe, which we find ourselves in, where more and more people either consciously reject belief in God or live if there is no God with no thought one way or the other. That here we're in this, we want to point this out to people. William Lane Craig puts it, this question, what is the significance of man's life without God, or a world without God, before even addressing if God exists at all? So what we want to do is start building our case for God by showing the absurdity of life without God. We want to show what it looks like, tastes like, feels like. We open their eyes and minds to the need for God by showing them the reality of life without God. And in that tension, again, we can start building the case for God. So that's why we're talking about this tonight. So although it's a relatively new branch of apologetics, there were many great thinkers that addressed this issue long ago. One of the first, as Jeffrey already mentioned, is Blaise Pascal, who lived from 1623 to 1662. And I have one little, I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but if y'all want to pass these around, kind of. Thank you very much. But for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know this about, I mean, I knew he was a smart guy, but Blaise Pascal was a brilliant scientist, mathematician, and philosopher. He was actually a child prodigy who at 16 published a treatise on projective geometry. I don't know what that is, but it sounds quite impressive. So at 18, he actually invented a calculating machine. And again, this is in the 1600s. And he had written that one could not only do all sorts of reckoning without feathers or casters, but they could be done infallibly, even if one did not know any of the rules of arithmetic. So he invented this math machine in the 1600s. But what we'll be looking at and what we're interested in our talk tonight is what is infamously or famously known as Pascal's wager. Among his many talents and theories, he founded the theory of probability, and he applied this theory of probability to the existence of, is there God or not God? So I passed out that little graph. We'll look at that in a minute, but I also wanted to say that a lot of the information, in addition to Jeffrey's notes, are from this book by William Lane Craig, Reasonable Faith. And this is just one chapter. It's called The Absurdity of Life Without God. So Oh, sorry, yeah, no, I didn't make that many. Okay, well, we're gonna move on. All right, so I'm gonna read the layman's terms of what Pascal's wager looks like. Pascal's analysis of the human predicament leads up to his famous wager argument, by means of which he hopes to tip the scales in favor of theism. The founder of probability theory, Pascal argues that when the odds that God exists are even, then the prudent man will gamble that God exists. This is a wager that all men must make. The game is in progress, because we're already alive, and a bet must be laid. There is no opting out. You have already joined the game. Which then will you choose? That God exists or that he does not? Pascal argues that since the odds are even, reason is not violated in making either choice. So reason cannot determine which bet to make. Therefore, the choice should be made pragmatically in terms of maximizing one's happiness. If God does not exist, one has lost nothing. On the other hand, if one wagers that God does not exist and he does, then one has suffered infinite loss in the afterlife, not to mention the suffering that you experience here on earth. If he does not in fact exist, then one has gained nothing, but actually lost nothing either. Hence, the only prudent choice is to believe that God exists. So the little graph there, I think it just kind of breaks it down. I thought it helped me. But I also, there was one of the handouts, and I don't know if anybody printed it out, but it was actually his wager, what he had written. And Pascal's wager is part of a much larger work of his it was published posthumously after he died. And he apparently had been writing an apologetic. And they put these together, they call it Pensées, or however we say that in French, in thoughts. Pensée, thank you, okay. Pensée. But in the actual words that he wrote, they're complicated, yet beautiful and eloquent. And I don't claim to understand them all, but I would like to read them more and figure them out. But I also like to see the words straight from the person's mouth, so to speak, when I learn about things. But in this, I just wanted to point out two things that he that stood out to me that were understandable and made it clear. So on the second page, in the second paragraph, if you have it there, he goes, you have two things to lose, the true and the good, and two things to wager, your reason and your will, and your knowledge and your happiness. And your nature has two things to shun, error and unhappiness. So I skip down to the last sentence in that paragraph. Let us weigh the gain and the loss involved in wagering that God exists. Let us estimate that these two probabilities, if you win all. If you lose nothing. Wager then without hesitation that God does exist. And then on the last page, page 3, in the bottom, like 3 paragraphs at the end of discourse, he goes on to say, so now to what harm will you come by making this choice that God exists? You will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, generous, a sincere friend, truthful. Certainly you will not enjoy these pernicious delights of glory and luxury, but will you not experience others? I tell you, you will thereby profit in this life, and at every step you take along this road, you will see so great an assurance of gain and so little in what you risk, that you will come to recognize your stake to have been laid for something certain, infinite, which has cost you nothing. So I say all that to say, if we have an opportunity and someone doesn't believe in God, or we want to talk about God, if we understand kind of this wager theory, we can say, well, let's bet on God, bet on the belief in God, because it makes the most sense. It's not going to hurt you to believe in him, and it won't hurt you if you don't. So again, we want to have these applied apologetics and hopefully can, in a nutshell, use them in a conversation if we understand them before going in. Again, like I said, Pascal's wager was not the only thing. It was part of a much larger work. And you can see there in the notes, terminal avoidance. Pascal wrote eloquently of mankind's plight without God, and how man avoids divine knowledge and fills his life with meaningless distractions and trivial pursuits. He goes on to say, this present life is momentary, but the state of death is eternal. And I wanted to go down to that second paragraph, anyway, to another part. He said, instead, they are led as they feel inclined and as they indulge themselves, unreflective and careless, as though they can wipe out eternity and enjoy some passing happiness merely by repressing their thoughts. If he wrote this in 1600, imagine the distractions today that people have to suppress what they know is true. They numb themselves to reality and bury themselves in every distraction imaginable. He writes in a very, again, eloquent, he was a beautiful writer, but he goes on to say, I see the terrifying immensity of the universe which surrounds me and find myself limited to one corner of this vast expanse without knowing why I'm set down here, nor why the brief period appointed for my life is assigned to me at this moment, rather than another moment in all eternity that has gone before and will come after me. And he goes and he builds the argument a little more, but he says, from all this I conclude that I ought to spend every day of my life seeking to know my fate. I might perhaps be able to find a solution to my doubts, but I cannot be bothered to do so, nor will I take one step towards its discovery. I will go without foresight, and I will allow myself to drift towards death, uncertain of the eternity of my future state. Oh wait, and the most important line, I'm sorry, I skipped over it. And after treating with contempt those who are concerned with such matters, I will go without foresight and let myself drift towards death. So not only are we not going to think about eternity, but we're gonna make fun of the people that actually do and treat them with contempt as if they're just so ignorant. So that was thought very well said. And I know there's a lot more that he has written. Another great thinker that was back in 1800s. Not sure, I don't think he's listed in Jeffrey's notes, but it was one that was in William Lane Craig's chapter, is Fyodor Dostoevsky. And again, you can correct my pronunciation. Awesome, okay. So he of course was a brilliant Russian writer and thinker and wrote many great works, just to name a few: Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, Notes from the Underground, The Idiot, Demons, and lots more. And in his books, he explores deeply good and evil, God versus no God, guilt and innocence. He explores them all beautifully. But one of his most famous chapters, or one of his most famous dissertations, was in the book The Brothers Karamazov, in a chapter called The Grand Inquisitor. And in this, he presents both sides of the God versus no God. Dostoevsky, he practiced building the strongest case possible for both sides of an argument. And the argument for or against the existence of God was no different. Actually, this was, of course, one of his most famous arguments. So good that many use his statement of the existence of evil and his copious examples of truly horrific acts of evil perpetrated by one human upon another, frequently on children by their parents, that this argument against evil, people use it in dissertations, but also people falsely think that he was an atheist. Again, he purposely builds a strong argument so that he can build his defense. But in this same argument, he goes, the person who believes in God goes on to say, yes, all of this evil is here. That is true. If there is no God, then everything is permissible. He says, and not even just the hedonistic, but all the darkest acts are permissible, for by what measure could they be wrong? If no God, we are in complete moral relativism, and no act can be condemned. And to live consistently with this belief leads at best to depression and nihilism, but at worst to suicide. Again, William Lane Craig summarizes Dostoevsky's argument. He says that Dostoevsky recognizes that this response to atheism constitutes no proof of Christianity. Indeed, he rejects that there could be such. Men demand of Christ that he furnish them bread and circuses, but God refuses to do so. The decision to follow Christ must be made in loneliness and anxiety. Each person must face for himself the anguish of a world without God, and in the solitude of their own heart, give themselves to God in faith. So this is the calling of our goal of this first building block in the cultural apologetics is to point out the dark bleakness of a truly godless world. And again, back to our video, ample examples of what it looks like when people have either don't believe in God or ignore God or don't think about him one way or the other and only think about themselves. One other current issue I wanted to bring up, the movie Sound of Freedom, which I'm sure, did a lot of people see that? Yeah. Just the monstrous evil that is happening here in Atlanta, here in our country. It's unbelievable. And those monstrous people are examples of atheism, of nihilism, of darkness, and of the worst acts of evil. And sadly, the United States is the largest purchaser of these poor children that are kidnapped and trafficked. And for people to think that living without God would lead to peace and harmony is just beyond logic. So, and we can go on in Jeopardy. So we talk about the gospel of good news of atheism. All right, so obviously Chesterton's not an atheist, but he did say, of course, many great things. But in this particular one, he says the danger is when people stop believing in God, it's not that they will believe in nothing, they'll believe in anything. I think we can see that clearly in how people idolize and have made politics their religion, group identity is their religion, self-worship, football, take your pick of what people are going to choose to believe in. We were created to worship God. In the absence of worshiping God, we're going to find something. And because of our fallen nature, we're going to worship down, not up. So, so we're going to go on and have a couple of quotes here from some of these brilliant atheists. Richard Dawkins, life has no purpose than to perpetrate the survival of DNA. Life has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And if we apply that to the world, we have no leg to stand on for anything that you want to say is justice. There's no reason for women's rights. There's no reason to protect children. There's no reason for charity, for helping the poor. Because if we're only going to perpetrate DNA, then the strongest can do whatever they want. The strongest, the powerful, and the richest. That's all it's going to come down to. We have Quentin Smith, a former philosophy professor at Western Michigan University. The most reasonable belief is that we come from nothing, by nothing, for nothing, and we should all acknowledge this foundation. Which so many of these people, it begs the question, then why are you writing things? Why are you standing up in front of people preaching if it doesn't mean anything? The illogic of these arguments just grows and grows on me. But we have Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics, no less, at Princeton University. He goes, we are all products of blind natural selection. Morality and values are merely reflections of our subjective attitudes. And in that case, everything is permitted and nothing matters. Well, at least he got that right. If there's no God, like we just said, everything is permitted. And there's no outrage. There's no logical moral outrage that you can come to if there's no God. And it's just, there's no right and wrong. And we're just a product of accidental things bumping together. When asked if there's anything immortal in humanity, Michael Scriven, how to say it? Thank you. A philosopher of science and a past president of the American Educational Research Association, well, that's terrifying, goes, of course not. We die and rot like fish. Well, again, how lovely. Let's live up to that. I'm gonna move on to, we go on, it says that if human beings, unless miseducated otherwise, want to know, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? These are the essentials. So it's ever since the Enlightenment, which is, again, is a contradiction, I think, man has sought answers to these questions by human reasoning alone, apart from God and outside of divine revelation. The secular answers to this search are not encouraging. You are the accidental byproduct of nature, a result of matter plus time plus chance. There is no reason for your existence. All you face is death and extinction. Again, there's that postmodern secular world that we're in, that there is no God. The historian Oswald Spengler says, mankind has no aim, no idea, no plan, any more than a family of butterflies or orchids. And again, I'm just still struck by by the illogic and the idiocy of them. Even, why would you have a PhD? If it doesn't mean anything, if we're no more important than butterflies, why are you studying and writing papers and getting up in front of people and giving speeches? It makes no sense. Cornell biologist William Provine, because there is no life after death, there's no ultimate foundation for knowledge and no ultimate meaning for life. So again, same thing. Richard Dawkins, if there is no God, then human life is absurd. Dawkins says, in a materialistic universe, there is no bottom. There is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless existence. But then in this quote that Jeffrey said earlier, he said the biggest evil in the world is God. So he's going to contradict himself no matter what. If you don't believe in good and evil, then how can you go on and say that? How can you build your argument with that? And Bertrand Russell, we must build our lives on the firm foundation of despair. That's why get up if we're gonna build it. Yes, sir. Yes, Jeffrey.
But so none of these people live their lives on this basis.
Right.
They all think that their lives mean something. It's so dishonest.
It's very dishonest. And again, and illogical. Illogical and dishonest. They claim to be men of intellect, and they claim they apparently have PhDs in something, but they can't, nobody can live this way. We have Ernest Nagel, Human Destiny is an episode between two oblivions, which is kind of what Pascal said. You know, we don't know what's before us, we don't know what comes after us, we're in this small little moment, but let's really figure out what that is, not just give up. And then we have no hope of immortality. Our life leads only to a cold grave and everlasting extinction. There's a paragraph here, a small paragraph from John Updike's a book where he says, and it's very interesting and dark. And anyway, without warning, David was visited by an exact vision of death, a long hole in the ground, no wider than your body, down which you're drawn while the white faces recede. You try to reach them, but your arms are pinned. Shovels pour dirt in your face, and there you will be forever in an upright position, blind and silent, and in time, no one will remember you, and you will never be called. As strata of rock shift, and your fingers elongate, and your teeth are distended sideways in a great underground grimace, indistinguishable from a strip of chalk, and the earth tumbles on, and the sun expires, and unaltering darkness reigns where once there were stars. My goodness. But again, if people really believe this, they would not get out of bed. I wouldn't. So again, we're gonna go, when John Lennon's utopian pipe dream notwithstanding, living in a godless world would be anything but liberating. It would be the dystopian nightmare. In fact, it would absolutely crush the human soul. Again, another quote from William Lane Craig. Modern man thought that when he had gotten rid of God, he had freed himself from all that repressed and stifled him. Instead, he discovered that in killing God, he had also killed himself. Living in an impersonal, purposeless, and purely materialistic universe can only lead to hopelessness and nihilistic despair. As we read in Ecclesiastes, repeatedly laments, all is useless, everything is dust in the wind. And you can, also in the appendix, there are the lyrics there for Dust in the Wind that again, we probably could all sing if we wanted to. And I'm not gonna go into that, except there is one line that I thought was true in the whole song. It's all your money won't another minute buy. So at least we know that's true. The rest is just going on about the futile uselessness of life, and it means nothing. So not only is life of each individual person doomed, but the whole human race too. In fact, the whole universe faces extinction. Another one of Craig's quotes, which I just found particularly poignant. He says, if there is no God, then man and the universe are doomed. Like prisoners condemned to death, we await our inevitable execution. We're just marching towards death if there's nothing outside of us, if there's nothing larger than us, if this is it. I thought it was particularly poignant. Nothing in life of each, the individual person is doomed, and so is the whole humanity. The whole universe is expanding, and everything in it is growing farther apart. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder until its energy is used up. Eventually, the stars will burn out, and all matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There'll be no light, no heat, no life. But we'll have God. So another great thinker from the 1800s was Nietzsche. And he wrote, well, he was an atheist, but he was a very thoughtful atheist, if one can say that. Again, a contradiction in terms, but he understood the predicament of modern humanity and the consequences of the death of God. He knew that once people realized the implication that there's no God, that people would be driven to despair. If people didn't believe in God, Christianity would collapse. Biblical moral values would disintegrate, and an age of nihilism would envelop humanity, as we're seeing now. Nietzsche said, our whole European culture is moving for some time now with a tortured tension that is going from decade to decade as towards a catastrophe. He realized everything would change, and he realized everything would be terrible, yet he thought it was all for the better because it was reality. So the incongruency of that is again, I can't understand it. But he did write this marvelous parable, and we're almost out of time, but it's Parable of a Madman. And we had sent that out, and I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's poetic and beautiful and meaningful. So if you guys have it, if not, that's fine. The second paragraph, I want to read that, where he says it starts out, have you not heard that a madman is about? The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as to an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. And I have to go on and read the next because it's just, but this too, let me go back and say, it kind of honestly reminds me of Job. When God is saying, did you fill the oceans? Did you create the mountains? Did you paint the horizon? I mean, Nietzsche painted such a beautiful picture of that. But the madman goes on to say, how shall we comfort ourselves? The murderer of all murderers, what was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? That, I think, is what we've all tried to become. And then the last line, he goes, they go on, so the madman was further related, was running in and out of churches. And as they would lead him out of the churches, he would say this to each and every one, what after all are these churches now, if not the tombs and the sepulchres of God? So this is what happens when God is dead. Yet this man, this brilliant man who wrote this, clung to the belief of atheism. And I'm sure you guys all know, he died of insanity in an insane asylum. We don't know if that's why, but one would have to think. Apparently he was one who believed quite earnestly in living authentically. So to live authentically, if you're an atheist, it would drive you insane. So, we're out of time. There's a little bit more, well, there's actually a fair amount more to go that we could pick up, but if like, and anybody have any comments, anything we wanted to say or bring up? Go ahead, Paul.
First of all, Justin the Wind, Carrie Livgren, I've got this from Ken Boa, who is a local.
Okay, that sounds
He
familiar.
knows Carrie Livgren. And Carrie became a Christian.
Oh,
Carrie was at this point, actually, he said that he got some inspiration from Ecclesiastes. This morning, Ken Boa recommended reading, he actually was talking a little bit about Blaise Pascal. He
Oh.
recommended reading Peter Kreeft's book,
mm,
Christianity for Modern Pagans, which is, I guess, his, Peter Kreeft's writing about and includes the Pensée.
Oh.
Blaise Pascal, so it's a way to read that.
Excellent.
And then just one other comment, I just have to ask for
Mhm.
this. So I recognize Blaise Pascal was a lot smarter than I was, but when I read this wager,
yeah,
my question is that genuine faith?
he did have genuine
I know
faith.
he did.
He
I'm
did.
just saying the path, the wager, it sounds very, like, that doesn't.
It
sound
sounds like
a
fire
faith to me.
insurance, but,
Yes, that's right,
right,
it sounds like car insurance.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. No, I know he was a Christian.
Yeah,
I'm just
but
saying.
I think that particular came from like a 29-page dissertation on Pascal's wager, that one little graph. So you're right. I mean, if somebody just was gonna believe in it because, well, it's better than something else, at least it's a start.
Well,
Alright.
you said that it was pragmatic.
Yes.
Based on probability.
Right, not
Now,
necessarily.
that's not typically the basis on which we come to faith.
But maybe we can start somewhere. It's better- it's, we
But,
believe, hopefully we can believe in God or say,
Well,
or
yeah,
see
it's
the
like,
logic of
at
it.
least-
Mhm.
At least consider that there may be a God to
Right.
whom you're accountable, take that seriously, and perhaps it will lead to true
Perhaps it
faith.
Karen, you had something to say?
Reasonable faith. I
Oh,
guess.
Peter Kreeft is amazing. Yeah.
I said that to someone once,
Yeah.
and his response was, yeah, but what if that means I'm missing out on another religion that's real, like, for instance, like he said, Hinduism.
Oh. Well, I mean, you can't fix stupid. No, I'm sorry. Sorry. But if someone's gonna refuse, if they're not an actual seeker, right, there's not much we can do. Yeah. Yes, yes, Millie.
It's interesting, this is not maybe to end on a positive note, but break point today.
Well, I was gonna-
Suicide rates at
yes.
all-time high.
I had that in my notes to go over later. 50,000
Suicide rates
suicides.
at all-time high today on break.
I heard, I was gonna talk about it. We ran out of time. 50,000 suicides this year. And that doesn't count drug overdoses or alcohol deaths or the mass killings from the shooters. Yes, 50,000
Deaths of despair.
deaths of despair. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Millie, because I didn't have a chance to, but yeah.
And it correlates quite well with the fact that belief in God is declining.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's very definite correlation.
Well, there's that gap there between the desperation, the deaths of despair that we're seeing and what the church has to offer, what God has to offer. We have all this bleakness and despair, but we have such opportunity to speak into that. Let me say one more thing, because I love this quote. I was gonna end with it, but it's my favorite quote from Lord of the Rings. And you guys probably all know what I'm gonna say, but it's where Frodo is lamenting. And he goes, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish this mission, I wish none of this had happened. And Gandalf says, so do all who live in such times, but that is not for us to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. So what will we do with the time that God has given to us?
It's great.
All right.
Thank you, it's very helpful.
You're welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Donna.
All
Very,
right.
very good.
And Paul.
We will not be meeting next week. It's the 40th, anniversary of Johnson Ferry's founding, but we will meet, of course, the week after. Even though it's fall break, but we always meet fall break and spring break anyway. And, make a note, no class next week. Yes.
Regarding that, next Wednesday, our church is having a free outdoor dinner. So you're welcome to come. I think it's 5 o'clock.
Is that Johnson Ferry? Is that here?
Yeah, right
Yeah,
here.
the celebration of the 40-year anniversary.
Yeah,
right?
so they're gonna have meals for free outside.
Free food.
Okay. Well, Who said there is no free lunch? That's not true, apparently. So, anyway, well, great being with you. Thank you so much, Donna. Excellent, presentation. Yeah. And, those of you joining us online, any comments or questions before we close things out for this evening? Anything? Well, thanks again for joining us, and look forward to continuing on in 2 weeks. We have an enormous amount of material yet to cover, and so we'll try to make as much progress as possible from session to session. And blessings on the rest of your week. Good being with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Richard, this is my husband.
Yeah, well.